you just mentioned pastoral adventurism, and I would like to use that as a bridge to ask you if you could recount for us. I know that you were in your earlier days of your ecclesial career, you were a missionary to the Soviet Union. Did you take Bibles there?
So I don't think this is just a matter of personal history, although I hope it'll be interesting for some people. But T.S. Eliot in the Four Quartets has this one of many pregnant phrases where he says, "In the end is our beginning," and very often we find in life that the things that happened in the beginning are absolutely pertinent to what happens at the end. And so I'm astonished at what my experience in the Soviet Union in the early 1980s provided me with now. And it's one of the reasons I became a Catholic, and certainly one of the reasons I've become a culture warrior, so to speak. One of the reasons I took up the cudgels against the present culture early. But so what happened was, as a youth, I grew up reading Dostoevsky, Solzhenitsyn. I adored Dostoevsky, and when I met Solzhenitsyn for the first time, I was probably about 19. It was my first year as an undergraduate law student. I was absolutely astonished because nobody had taught me growing up what had actually happened under Stalin or in the Soviet Union. And Solzhenitsyn stuff was being smuggled out. He had smuggled it out of labor camp on tiny pieces of paper that he'd written on with a pencil, and it was smuggled out to the West. And when I read it, even then I began to say, why doesn't anyone know what has happened to the church behind the Iron Curtain? And a sufficient number of people knew, so that there were two agencies. One was an academic one, Keston College, Keston Research, which set out to publicize facts in order to act as solidarity for the Orthodox Christians and some Catholics, of course, too. In fact, many Catholics, particularly in Czechoslovakia. But because it set out to keep its hands clean of activism, it spawned some associated but very practical activist organizations run by well-meaning individuals who became essentially Bible smuggling agencies. And I was asked, it was when Andropov was premier, if I would smuggle Bibles into Russia and then later smuggle theological textbooks into Czechoslovakia, because the Catholic Church in Czechoslovakia had gone underground. The government had simply forbidden bishops to ordain priests. It had decided that within one generation it could simply get rid of the Catholic Church by the symbol device. And so there were no public ordinations in Czechoslovakia I guess they would have done it about the 1970s, perhaps earlier. So the churches went underground, and there were catecumene ordinations, but they had no access. They had no books. All the books were locked up in libraries that the government monitored very carefully. So some of us smuggled books in. And I would say I'm left with those experiences did two things for me in particular. One is, I found that Marxism has a kind of smell or a taste. It's very hard to explain this. I'm not sure whether this is intuition or a spiritual charism or something more somatic, but it was about 2005 when working in a very radical university, I said, I can taste Marxism in the air. I can taste it. There was a kind of rusty taste at the back of my mouth. And I thought, what is this? Why? How can this possibly be? In 1989, as Fukuyama promised us, history ended, liberal democracy has triumphed. I must be mad. Why do I think this? And then I began to read a bit, and I encountered the Frankfurt School, and I noticed what was happening in terms of political correctness. And I thought, the reason I can taste Marxism in the air is because it's back. And I see it. I see who you are. I see what you're doing. And I can see perfectly well that if this continues along the trajectory it's launched on, there will be no freedom of speech, there will be no freedom of conscience. And as usual, you will make a direct line for the church. And so I would think, so I resigned my faculty I had tenure, which was jolly nice, and about 10 more years towards a pension, which would be jolly nice. And I didn't want to be fired, but I wanted to speak out, and I knew I would be fired if I spoke out. So I resigned. So that was the first thing. The second thing was that it's become clearer to me that the church is almost certainly going to have to go back into the catacombs. There will be, there has already begun a monitoring of what you can say in public. There are Presbyterian clergy in Northern Ireland who have had their sermons sent to the police, and the police have investigated them and called them in and given them warnings. And we're only a hair's breadth away from the practice of totalitarianism in the Soviet Union. It's just the beginnings, but the difficulty I have is that I can't see anything at all in our culture that is going to slow this down or change its direction. And one of the things that should be happening is the church should be alert to what happened in the 20th century. The church was, we go back to Pope Leo XIII and that extraordinary experience in 1884, when we knew perfectly well what was going to happen, and Our Lady of Fatima. It's not as if the church has not been given some kind of warnings of this, but we've had both the warnings and the experience, for goodness sake. And so the church should be giving itself more time by energetically confronting the culture. I mean, I did a YouTube podcast the other day, for example, where I wanted to suggest to my followers that we should never, ever endorse the categories of racism or feminism, because they are loaded categories which introduce the whole horizontal pseudo-egalitarian equality of outcome. And as Christians, we have antidotes to these problems that are really quite beautiful, quite sophisticated, and very effective and miraculous. And so there can be no racism if you love your neighbor as yourself. If you love God first, and out of the love of God, you then see the image of God in your neighbor. And it is impossible for Christians to be racist if they are being faithful. And Christianity, through the writings of Paul in particular, has a profound mystical alertness to the relationships, interdependent relationships between men and women that are set within a hierarchy. But to get there, you have to be able to see through a lens of a hierarchy subverted by love. If you are indoctrinated into power relations, the hierarchy will upset you and offend you greatly. But if you are born again, born from above, if you are theologically informed, then a hierarchy, since we have hierarchies, Jordan Peterson's been very good in explaining that they're hardwired into any society that treasures competence. What does our Lord do with hierarchy? He then subverts it with love and the interdependence of men and women through St. Paul and all the theology, the mystical theology of the church, which sees the church as a spouse of Christ. We have an antidote to misogyny and feminism and misandry. We are the best people to produce the very virtues that secular Marxism, cultural Marxism, thrusts upon people as their agenda for human improvement.
Hi, thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel by clicking on that red subscribe button and click that bell so you'll be notified when we upload new content. Check out all the links below for subscriptions to Inside the Vatican magazine and to the Morning Hand Letters, which is free to your inbox. You stay connected. It's content that you can get nowhere else. All that information is below. Thank you.